Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special event, The Reality of Dreaming with Dr. Deirdre Barrett. I'm James Wetzel, the producer of adult programs at the Museum of Science, and I am so thrilled to introduce our very special guest this evening. What are our dreams trying to tell us each night? And how does this apply to the outbreak of COVID dreams people are experiencing all around the world during our current pandemic? Well, tonight we are joined by Dr. Deirdre Barrett, on faculty at Harvard University and author of The Committee of Sleep and the forthcoming Pandemic Dreams, which we'll hear a little bit more about a little bit later on, to learn all about her research into the science of dreams and how current events like the COVID-19 pandemic impact our dreams each night. And tonight is a part of our virtual season of adult programming, which is a part of our MOS at Home initiative. We have turned the Museum of Science into a virtual museum, offering free STEM-related programming on a daily basis through our digital platforms. And as a part of that, we have launched our Subspace Adult Programs After Dark channel to host tonight's event and the rest of our upcoming lineup. We have some incredible events still to come, still to even be announced. So I urge you to keep an eye on that full lineup and keep coming back to hang out with us after dark. And a little bit later on, Dr. Barrett will answer some of your questions. So as those come to mind while you're listening to the talk, I ask you to just submit those using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And a little bit later on, we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. I need to thank our friends at the Lowell Institute for their continued support of the adult programming. Without them, we would not be here tonight. This event would not be possible, and it would not be free. So please join me in a big virtual round of applause and thanks to the Lowell Institute. And finally, after the talk, if you can, I ask you to go to mos.org/science matters to show your support for MOS at Home and allow us to keep bringing programming like this to you. Once again, that's mos.org/science matters. But now it is my pleasure to turn it over and welcome our very special guests to the Zoom. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Deirdre Barrett to the Zoom. Take it away, Dr. Barrett.
Hi there. Okay, I hope everyone's seeing the PowerPoint mostly. Notify me somehow if not. So what I'm going to do in this talk is to tell you just a little bit about dreams in general, and then the majority of it is going to be about the COVID-19 pandemic dreams. And then toward the end, I'm going to give you some techniques to work with your dreams that really work on any dreams, but I'll use the COVID-19 ones as an example. So we've known since the 1950s that there's a sleep cycle where every 90 minutes we go into rapid eye movement sleep. Our brain waves become as active as if we were awake on average. And this is one of my undergraduate students, Aradine, when I take the class on a field trip to the Harvard Sleep Lab. To all the rest of the students, watch one student sleep. So that gives you a sense how many electrodes and then monitor setup when somebody's in a sleep lab. And a couple slides later, we're going to have an EEG graph of what's going on from those electrodes. But first I wanted to say, I basically think of dreams as just thinking in a very different brain state. And there are two big differences in the amounts of activation, even though the overall amount is about the same. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the area right behind our forehead, which is our linear logic area, reasoning. It's also where we censor things, both in the Freudian sense, but also in the conventional wisdom. Oh, that's not the right way to solve this problem, or that's not the procedure we do. So that area is way less active, not totally turned off, but way less active. It gets a little more active when we have a lucid dream, not as much as awake, but more than any of the rest of REM sleep. But it's not noticing discrepancies and odd things and reasoning like we usually do. Then the secondary visual cortex is much more active even than we're awake. We have a primary visual cortex that just takes in the information from our eyes, but the area that builds imagery, whether it's from something we're looking at or something we're imagining, is this secondary visual cortex. And it is just wildly, intensely active during rapid eye movement sleep. So I mentioned that every 90 minutes, this is the start of sleep where my arrow is. This is the first REM period, 90 minutes in. But almost everyone has seen the REM cycle and knows the 90-minute things. But something that a lot fewer people are aware of that's very well established from the EEG readings is that each REM period gets longer. You see, they're the same space apart. They're 90 minutes apart. But the first one's just a few minutes, whereas the last one of the night is half an hour or so. So if you sleep 4 hours is down here, you're not getting nearly half your dream time. You're getting less than a quarter of it. So we all go around a little bit sleep deprived most of the time. We wake up with an alarm before we naturally would. We pour caffeine into ourselves. We run off to work and school. So we generally are not getting as much sleep as we naturally would, but that means especially not as much REM. And this last REM period is a long one. It's also a little more intense. We have more vivid dreams in it, and we're often just not getting it with modern sleep. So the reason that dreams became so vivid for so many people at the start of the pandemic was that most crises stir up a little dream recall for psychological reasons, but usually they're associated with a little less sleep. But in this event, we were stirred up psychologically, but we were staying home and sometimes not setting the alarm. Lots of people furloughed from work. So people were catching up on sleep on average. So that combination of stirred up psychologically, but actually getting more sleep, this is a normal amount of sleep, but if you're catching up, you actually get a super long period out there. So that's the reason that so many people were saying they recall more dreams than usual, more bizarre dreams. So that's not the main thing that the survey I'm going to talk about or my book are set up to look at. They're about dreams, about the pandemic itself. But I was very interested in this just kind of heightened dream recall effect that we see here. Oh, and I make art from my dreams, so the top part of that is my artistic depiction entering REM sleep. And I wanted to show you a couple of others. I took my two local ones for this talk. They're both based on the same dream where I was walking from my home into the center of Harvard Square late at night in the dream. And I discovered that there were these little creatures up on the rooftops. And I thought, they must have lived there all these years and I've never looked up and seen them. And then as I walked on a little further, they were also down in the street. And I thought, oh, they come down in the middle of the night and I've never been here in the middle of the night, which of course is not true. So usually when I wake up from a very vivid dream in the dream, and for this one, there were a couple I wanted to capture of two of my favorite buildings. But most of the time I spend on dream research. And one of the areas I've looked at a lot is dreams about trauma. This is an edited book where I have a lot of chapter authors writing in this. And clinically, I've worked with people who were abused as children, with rape survivors, with survivors of automobile accidents, veterans. But research-wise, I've collected dreams after several big mass events, which were Kuwaitis after the Iraqi occupation. I found a collection of 500 dreams from a Nazi POW camp that had never been looked at because the person collecting them for his dissertation had died in the camp. So I analyzed those. And I collected dreams from the Arab countries during the Arab uprising. And then the the group of dreams that's probably the most similar were after 9/11. I collected dreams. And just like in this pandemic, what was really striking after 9/11 was that lots of people were dreaming about the events that had happened. They were having anxiety dreams. They would have some of the imagery of planes crashing into something or buildings falling down or bad men with knives, but often they would be intermixed. It would be their own house that was burning and crashing down. It would be planes flying into a building in their city. So part the real events, partly dreamlike anxieties about it. And then the people who were having really full-on traumatic nightmares were the first responders, the firemen, the police, the people who had barely gotten out of the lower floors of the building before they came down. Those people were having repetitive reenactments of the trauma in their dreams. And it turns out that PTSD nightmares are the only ones that don't mostly happen in rapid eye movement sleep. They happen across all those other sleep stages when normally the brain is not very active. And some psychologists, myself included, think that they may be just pretty much the same thing as daytime flashbacks, that the traumatic way periodically, whatever state of consciousness we're in. So as soon as the pandemic was obviously happening, I thought that it would be a really interesting period of time to be collecting the world's dreams. So I set up a survey at SurveyMonkey on March 24th, the morning of, and began collecting dreams and a talk on it. But I just got so many such fascinating dreams from all over the world that I decided I wanted to write something longer. So this book, Pandemic Dreams, is just out this week. It's already definitely live at Amazon, and it's supposed to be at all the other online booksellers very shortly. And so what I found in the survey was that there were certain clusters of typical dreams, but also that they didn't stay static over the 3 months I've been doing this. They tended to change over time. So early in my survey, what I got was a number of dreams about literally getting the virus. The person would be spiking a fever, or they'd have trouble breathing, or sometimes it was slightly dreamlike symptom. One woman looked down and saw blue stripes on her stomach, and remembered that that was the first sign of the COVID-19 infection. So just, I'm dreaming I'm getting sick with COVID was an awfully common dream through the early part of the time. But then also, I saw lots of metaphors that the dreamer identified as representing the getting the virus or fearing the virus. And the biggest group of metaphors for the COVID-19 virus were bug attacks. I just saw every kind of bug in the world, swarms of bees or hornets coming at the dreamer, armies of cockroaches racing at them, masses of wriggling worms. Sometimes the dreamer would just open a door and see all these insects, or pull back bed covers and see them. But most of the time they were coming at the dreamer, attacking them. And I think that this is because of this, partly because of the slang term we use. We say, I've got a bug, to mean I've got a virus, or at least that we're sick. And dreams often do sort of pun-like visual representations of words or concepts. So I think that's part of why the bugs. And then the other thing I think is that lots of little tiny things that cumulatively could harm or kill you makes a very good symbol for the COVID-19 virus. But I did not see bug attacks after 9/11 or any of the other crises I studied, and they're a huge cluster of the dreams, especially early on when people were dreaming about getting the virus, in both literally and metaphorically. The other much smaller cluster that's specific to the pandemic is invisible monsters. People will dream that they're outside and they know there's some kind of monster that can attack them, but they can't see it. And there were several in buildings where the person would be walking through kind of dimly lit buildings, long corridors, and in one case they heard the monster footsteps behind them, but they couldn't see the monster. In another, they saw the shadows of the monsters all around. One woman who was watching different people one by one get knocked over, and they begin to suffer bad bite mark injuries and eventually die, but she couldn't see the thing that was inflicting the injuries. And she knew that the invisible monster attacking them could leap up to 6 feet from one person to another after they killed someone. And as the last person was dying, she realized she was standing less than 6 feet away, and the monster came. I did not see invisible monsters after any of these other events. After other events, I do see other kinds of monsters, and again with this, there's some general monsters that you can see, but I don't think they're as unique to representing the virus that we don't see. And I did get a Trump monster dream. He didn't look like the virus in this street art, but the dream was that this New York City woman was out in Central Park and people were running away like in a horror movie from King Kong or something, running through Central Park in terror. And she just stood there and waited, and the thing chasing them appeared, and it was Trump, only he was like 20 feet tall. He had one eye in the center of his forehead, and he was grabbing the stragglers from the crowd and stuffing them in his mouth and devouring them. And after each time he did that, he would sort of sadly say, why not? He'd still pick up another person and eat them. Then I saw lots of just the same metaphors that you see to any crisis, where natural disasters are the most common: hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, wildfires, tsunamis, every kind of natural disaster. And then also other disasters like mass shooters in the streets, just anything bad that can happen stands in for the virus some, because our dreaming mind is just so visual that when we're feeling terror in our dream, it's searching for some image that's sort of compatible with what the emotion center is doing at that moment. And natural disasters are a good one to pair with fear. And some of the dreams were just literally about a tornado coming, and others would have elements from the actual pandemic. The tsunami was fake news and there was no real tsunami coming, or Governor Cuomo would be telling people that they had to shelter inside in their own house and couldn't go out because of mass shooters in the streets right now. So they combine the natural disaster or the shooters with what's really going on in the news. And one of my early dreams in mid to late March, as everything was starting to happen, was that I was in a beautiful old antique library, like in a private home. And there was beautiful oil lamp glowing, and it was really nice, except the curtains were drawn, and I knew that outside there was something horrible happening. And at first it seemed like it might be a war or a riot, but gradually I became more and more preoccupied with it and unable to appreciate my cozy library. But it also settled into being the Black Plague of Europe, the bubonic plague. So normally when I wake up from a dream, I make the exact image that I've seen, but the library just didn't go with, the library was what I was looking at, but the feeling was about what I knew was out there. So I took more liberties than usual and made this image of a sort of classic medieval plague doctor wandering a landscape of COVID particles. And so that's the image I put on the book eventually. Another cluster that I saw a lot of early on were the masks and the staying 6 feet apart. And although lots of them were anxiety dreams, like the getting the virus dreams, they also resembled something else that we know is really common in dreams, which is anytime you're learning a new skill or habit, you tend to dream about it selectively. There's studies on both learning foreign languages and on people playing new video games that show that both of those crop up in your dreams a lot, and just kind of repetitive stuff like the dream is helping you learn the skill. So there were huge numbers of either the person goes outside and suddenly realizes they don't have their mask on, or they've gotten close to somebody and they remember they're supposed to be 6 feet away and or wearing a mask, or they go out doing everything they're supposed to and they encounter people without masks or who want to come up and touch them or coughing in their face. So in the second category, they're like explaining the rule and what you have to do. In the first one, they're remembering it with alarm. So I think this is really just kind of like the learning French or learning to play a video game, that the dream is practicing and reminding and actually helping people get used to, you have to have that mask on. Remember to stay 6 feet apart. So these were a big cluster of the dreams earlier. And in that fairly early period, about a week after the other dream I told you, I had a dream where I needed to go outside and there was something very toxic in the air, but I had to take my cat out into this toxic air. And so I was trying to put a hood over his head that was going to protect him from breathing the toxic air. And just like in real life, when I'm doing something that's good for my cat, he does not understand that and he struggles with me. So most of the dream was this very tactile imagery of trying to pull this hood over the cat's head and him just squirming and wriggling and not liking it. And it was a very anxious dream because I had to leave soon and I was afraid that I wouldn't get the hood on him in time. But then right at the end of the dream, I got the hood on him, and he's a great big cat. I picked him up under one arm and set out into this toxic air. I think I had a hood or mask on myself, but that part was very vague. And it wasn't like good by the end of the dream, but it was kind of like, okay, well now maybe this is going to be all right once I had the hood on him. So I often look for imagery. I used to run out and take pictures, but I'm doing a little bit less of that during lockdown. So I sometimes take public domain images. So I was looking for a picture of either a cat in a gas mask or a small gas mask that I could superimpose on a picture I did have of my cat. And while I was looking, I came across this image of a person carrying a lamb under their arm, and they're holding it just like I was holding my cat Morpheus, who is an enormous kind of dirty white cat. So it looked so much like my cat and that image that I cut out that figure and then digitally collaged it with all the COVID-19 particles again. So those were the most common early dreams, and all of those categories continue to some extent up until now. But some categories that were kind of rare early on became much more common, and those were all ones that people begin dreaming like, you know, April, May, kind of in the middle of the time that we've passed through so far. They tended to center on things about the secondary effects, not the virus itself, but the effects of all the precautions and things that we're doing about it. So sheltering at home was the biggest cluster of dream themes for that. And the metaphors for that tended to be exaggerated loneliness. There were lots of dreams of people who were thrown in jail or prison, sometimes for some dreamlike offense, but other times they kind of Kafkaesque. They couldn't figure out why they were imprisoned, but they were generally in solitary confinement. And then there were multiple alone in outer space dreams. Some of them were on spaceships, kind of like that film, I think it was called Gravity, of kind of lost in space. But there was one woman who was suddenly told by the government that she'd been selected to be the first colonist to Mars, and she was sent to Mars to establish a one-woman colony. She'd not volunteered for this, but she didn't seem to have any say. And there was another dreamer who was in a spaceship coming back from distant outer space, and he was headed home to Earth, and he was radioed that he needed to divert to Saturn and stay on Saturn. So he was going to live alone on Saturn for the rest of his life. So these are the kinds of dreams we see from people who are sheltering by themselves. And then people who are sheltering with their families or their roommates, often more extended family has moved in and usually lives with them, or extra friends are becoming roommates. Those people have lots of dreams about crowding and lack of privacy, but again, in a kind of a very exaggerated, dramatic, visual representation. One woman had the whole neighborhood had moved into her house, and she couldn't even walk through her rooms because there were so many cots set up that people were sleeping on. Another woman was trying to go to the bathroom and couldn't even close the bathroom door because everybody's luggage was blocking the bathroom door. So lots and lots of it's too crowded kinds of dreams. And then all of the other secondary effects also show up. Homeschooling shows up. There was one woman who dreamed that for some reason the homeschooling procedure that she had to do involved her taking all of her child's exams, and she was failing the math exams. So her child was getting these terrible grades because she, rather than the child, was the one who they required to take the math exams. The most nightmarish one was a woman who in reality was homeschooling her 10-year-old, and she got an email from the child's school saying that the entire class was being sent to her condominium and she was going to homeschool her kids' whole class for their financial things. People who are only furloughed were dreaming of being completely laid off. People who were laid off were dreaming about not having money for things, somewhat realistically, but also kind of fantastic. There was one man who went into a grocery store, and at first it was one of these anxiety dreams about staying away from people and whether they were within 6 feet of him as he bought groceries. But when he got up to the cash register, he opened his wallet and there was absolutely no money in his wallet. And then he sort of remembered that his credit cards had been taken away from him for lack of payment also. So he had no way to pay for groceries at the end of the line. But not all dreams are negative. I've only been telling you the bad ones, and that is because the bad ones dominate. But for the secondary effects, for things like lockdown, there are some kind of wish fulfillment. People who are lonely, dream of having company. People who don't like who they're stuck with dream about someone else. So Governor Cuomo showed up as a positive figure in a number of dreams, giving good advice, but he also showed up in sex dreams about people who were sheltering at home with him rather than either by themselves, as some were in actuality, or with a partner they were getting tired of in reality, como in some of these sex fantasy, romantic fantasy dreams. Actually, all of which came from women, but I just thought Randy Rainbow's images from the Cuomo-sexual song are so good. They just reminded me of several of the dreams that came in. And then another category that, again, is not a big category, but it is a positive one, is that people dream various ways of overcoming the epidemic, of which inventing cures is one of the main ones. And some of the cures are pretty fantastic. I've discovered there's something in cat saliva that will cure the virus, that a way that you can put the virus into a sound machine and hear the music that comes from it. And then you take the musical graph and you put the counterposing notes in and play that, and that will manufacture something that cures the virus. Most of them are very, very, very dreamlike. On the other hand, a few are sort of practical. One that wasn't a cure, but a detection, was this guy, Andy, who will feature in my talk in more detail in a minute. But one of Andy's dreams was that he was in a grocery store and he was doing the last minute shopping and trying to stay away from other people and worrying about whether they were sick. And he had his dog on a leash in the store with him. And he kind of thought it was odd that he had his dog in the store. He doesn't usually. But then he remembered that because of the pandemic, dogs are allowed in the store. So as he's just trying to grab stuff and get out of there, the dog periodically keeps grabbing his pants leg and tugging him. And about the third time the dog did it, he realized that the dog was pulling him away from particular people and that the dog must be able to smell that they were infected with COVID-19. So when he woke up, he remembered having heard, as I have, that dogs can be trained to sniff cancer rather reliably, and there are several places in the world where this is going on. So the first time he told me that, we just remarked on that, and there had been no stories in the press about that. But then very soon there were stories that several of the cancer sniffing dog places were starting to train them on COVID-19. And now there's been a story that one had very high success rate and that they're considering using these dogs in airports or something as a screening device, since people are fairly used to being sniffed by dogs in airports. So that one was really a potentially helpful idea that his dreaming mind came up with that he never thought about awake. And this is art about one of the more fantastic cures. Julia Lockhart draws dreams while people are telling Julia's husband, who's a dream worker, their dreams and doing dream interpretation. So this was a dream in which the woman had COVID-19, and there was a robin who came and began to pull black sticky bits of things out of her lungs, and gradually she was breathing easier and her lungs looked cleaner and healthier, and the robin was kindly, slowly, carefully removing all the COVID-19 from her. And this is Julia's drawing of that. And so now in the kind of third stage that I've seen since this started, a lot of the dreams are no longer about the virus itself, or specifically they're about the stages of reopening. And what's interesting is early on, there weren't many dreams about reopening, but when they were kind of positive wish fulfillment dreams. Like, we've been told we don't have to shelter anymore at home, we're out doing everything's fine and wonderful and beautiful. However, once states started actually reopening, and also I saw this in Europe and other places in the world, just as a place would really be doing their stage 1 and stage 2, people would begin to have anxious dreams. And a few more of I'm getting the virus, but what there were lots of were, especially for the workplace, but other settings they would go into would be really filthy, not necessarily in a virus way, but they'd go into the office and the carpet would be covered in black sticky stuff that they had to walk over barefoot for some reason. Or no one would have been in the office in 3 months, and so there would be all this black dust piled up everywhere. But some referred more specifically to the virus, like one woman had heard that her office was going to have everything separated further apart, and when she got there it looked like they'd misunderstood and they'd crowded everybody into cubicles that were now closer together. Or another one went back to work and none of her usual co-workers were there. There were all these strangers who looked really sickly to her and were coughing, and these were the people she had to work with now. So lots and lots of anxious dreams as we're reopening. And there are all these dreams about the distant future, and certainly the majority of them, again, are negative. That there are small groups of survivors who have to compete for resources. Sometimes it's a really violent competition. Sometimes it's just that they're either in this terribly hot wasteland, or one woman was sheltering up at the Arctic because that was the only place people could survive the virus. So just awful post-apocalyptic dreams are common, but again, I do want to share some of the positive ones. So less common, but nevertheless there are these distant future dreams where the future is better because of the pandemic having happened. And one group is just better socially. It's brought us together, and big government and monetary concerns are not at the forefront anymore, and everyone is cooperating and getting along, and there's this sort of idyllic, easing numbers of whales and dolphins in these dreams. I mean, a lot of them have clean water, or animals are back in larger numbers or where they didn't used to be. But the whales and dolphins are center stage in that. And some of them just match what people are saying in waking life, that they're seeing whales and dolphins frolicking very close to the shore, more so than they do when there's lots of boat traffic. But some are much more dreamlike. One woman had a whale had moved into the little pond that's really in her backyard, and although it was almost as big as the pond, it seemed to be loving living there, splashing around like it was a kid's inflatable swimming pool, very happy there. And my favorite was a woman who walked outside for the first time, and she said the whales had learned to fly. There were whales swooping through the sky now, and this is going to be the case for the future. And then one woman's, obviously to her at least, utopian future was a dream that Bernie Sanders was on television because he was the new president. And he was president because Donald Trump and Joe Biden had both died of COVID-19, so he'd been elected. And he was telling everyone that the pandemic was over and he wanted everyone to grow marijuana in their backyard, but no more than 5 plants maximum. And everybody was supposed to sell this little bit of marijuana in a dreamlike way. And it wasn't clear how the customers would come from if everyone was doing this, but everyone was to grow and sell a little bit of marijuana, and this was going to restart our economy in a positive, healthy way. So what I want to do last before the Q&A is to tell you a few techniques that you can use to work with your dreams. And the first 2 are dream interpretation, and the third one is to influence your dreams in the future. So modern dream interpretation is definitely not a cookbook, like, you look up what this symbol means, and it's not an expert telling you, oh, well, this is the archetype for this and this means. We definitely believe that the dreamer has their own symbol system, and that good dream interpretation is helping people discover what their metaphors and their imagery is. So the most direct approach to this is the dream interview, which very emphatically forbids that the interviewer do any telling the dreamer what this might be, asking leading questions. And this is meant to be done with another person, but you can actually, you're comfortable doing the dyadic questioning with. But anyway, the idea is that you pick out the key elements in the dream, like the main people in the dream, if there's an unusual object, the key actions in the dream, and you just ask the dreamer, pretend I'm from another planet. Just tell me, what a dog is. And one dreamer, the dreamer feels like they're defining it, but they will come out with these metaphoric statements. One dreamer will say, dogs are these cute little things. We have to take care of them. They're kind of like children. They're kind of pet. And the next person will say, well, dogs are these large animals. They have big teeth. I got bit by a dog when I was 12 and I still have scars from that. And the third person will say, dogs are man's best friend. They're more loyal than any human is going to be to you. So you just hear what a dog is a symbol of in each of those, and it's completely different for those three dreamers. So you go through each element in the dream. You can literally say, pretend I'm from another planet, or you can say, just define, pretend I don't know what the concept is, just tell me about it. And people will come out with some of their individual associations for each element. And then you can kind of string them together and ask a little vulnerable creature that you need to take care of, and you string together the associations to the other elements. So one COVID-19 dream that I did this with recently was Andy, the same one who dreamed of his dog detecting the virus, had a dream that he was back in Austin, Texas, which is where he went to college, but it's not where he's sheltered alone at the moment. But in the dream himself, but he'd been sheltering at home, but in Austin in the dream. And he was walking through his old streets and everything was closed except one bar, and it was a tourist bar that he never used to go to, but it was open and it looked really lively, and he kind of wondered if he should go in, and decided he'd go in and get a drink. So he went in, and while he was waiting for his drink, the man next to him fell over and blew away and was this two-dimensional cardboard figure. And he was so shocked because he thought this was a real person that he looked around at the other people in the bar to see if they were as shocked and surprised or if they'd known all along. And as he looked at them for their reaction, he realized they were all cardboard figures also. And one by one, they began to fall over and blow away. So when I asked him about Austin, he said kind of college town, party town, great music, like just lots of party social associations to what Austin is in general or was for him. Then tourist bar, he didn't like tourist bars. They're superficial. He normally didn't frequent them, but they're things where they're trying real hard to make it look like people are having a lot of fun. They're sort of fakey and pretend, but they look like a hopping social scene. And in the dream, that was the only option for him. But when I asked him what cardboard cutouts are, he sort of stopped and thought, and they said, well, actually the only ones I've ever seen are in the, it turned out actually to be Home Alone 2. that has them. And the kid is again stranded at home, this time at his uncle's townhouse. His family has gone off and forgotten him. And there are these bad people outside. And Andy's describing this. I'd never seen the film. There are these criminals outside who are at least going to try to kidnap him, maybe kill him. And so he finds all these life-size cardboard strings so that it looks like there's this loud, wild, happy party with lots of friends at his house, so the bad guys go away. So he basically interprets this as, you know, he's home alone, feeling both scared of the virus, but also lonely. And the dream has him so desperate for company, he'll do the tourist bar. And so desperate for company, he'll use cardboard cutouts, but then unlike the film where the cutouts succeed in the dream, because they're fake, they eventually leave and desert him, and he's alone again. So you can really, in a short amount of time and without any special training, use that technique to interpret dreams. And then the Almond Group technique, which you do need more than yourself for, ideally several people, but at least another person. In the Almond technique, instead of saying you can't give your interpretations of someone else's dreams, he goes the other way, because people are so tempted to, and he thinks that sometimes they are interesting suggestions for the dreamers. So in the Almond technique, you are told to say, if it were my dream, when you throw those things out there. It starts associating to elements in the dream. If it were my dream, this might be this. If it were my dream, this might represent this. And even things you know are not the dreamer's association. If it were my dream, it might have to do with that time my Uncle Ed did blah, blah. Because Almond says that even the things you think are so unique to you, we all have shared experiences, and he may have had an Uncle Ed that did something very similar. So you do this huge round of throwing out your own associations, and then the dreamer says which ones kind of did resonate and click for them. And sometimes ones that don't click at all, they don't sound right, help the dreamer to kind of go, no, it's not that at all, it's this other. They help clarify what it is by sort of this sense that it isn't something else that's being suggested. So this was a dream from this woman, May, who is a healthcare worker from New Zealand, but based in Australia. And she dreamed that she was inside an abalone shell out on the ocean, and it was dark and there was an unpleasant buzzing noise. And it started off as a very bad dream. But then gradually the buzzing subsided to a pleasant sound and then was gone completely. And the sun came out and there was this sparkling ocean and mountains in the background. And eventually a seal pup came swimming up right in front of her abalone shell and was frolicking around and acting playful with her. And so some of the group associated more to pandemic issues, that as a healthcare worker, she probably needed protective equipment. And if it was my dream, the shell might represent the PPE that you need and are wanting to have and maybe do or don't have. The noise is just the threat, but then it becomes beautiful and peaceful because New Zealand and Australia, unlike here, never got bad breakouts. They were as scared ahead of time that they were about to see overcrowded ICUs, and they didn't. So it's like the threat passed and they had a happy sunny day much sooner than other places did, and the seal pup sort of represented the happy ending. And other people associated to more personal associations. If you're in a shell, maybe you need to come out of your shell. Maybe the seal pup is a more playful side of yourself. If it were my dream, the seal pup might be inviting me to play. Maybe I should play more. And basically May at the end endorsed, there were some others that just didn't click for her, but she clicked. That was her experience of being a healthcare worker in Australia herself, but with all her family back in New Zealand. Something awful is about to happen, and then it really didn't, and all is well. And also she described herself as a pretty reserved person who probably should play and have a little more fun, and that sometimes she got invitations for that and she should probably take them. So let's see, I do want to do some Q&A, so let me do this quickly. But get so many questions through the pandemic about how do I just stop having these anxiety dreams I'm having? So I don't want to interpret them. I know I'm anxious about the COVID. How do I stop having them? So the best way, if you're having a lot of anxiety dreams that you don't want and seem to be making you more anxious, the best technique is to choose what dream you would like to have. Just think of your ideal dream to have tonight. Maybe there's someone you're not getting to see who you'd like to visit within your dream. Maybe you'd like to be in your beautiful favorite place. Lots of people like flying dreams. Lots of people may like that dream about the whale flying. Just whatever your kind of ideal, fun, nice dream to have would be. And as you're falling asleep, just tell yourself, I want to dream about this. I want to dream about this. And form an image, because our dreaming mind is so visual that images get through even more than the verbal requests. So picture the person, picture flying, or if you're one of those people that just can't form mental images awake, you might put a photo of a person flying, a bird flying, a picture of the person you want to be with on your night table, so that you stare at it just before you turn out your lights last thing, and then start telling yourself verbally that you want to dream about it. And in a study where I had people trying to dream on a particular topic, this worked about 50% of the time. It's not foolproof, but it definitely makes it likelier you'll dream on that topic, and even likelier that you won't have the anxiety dreams. And it's just a pleasant way to fall asleep. Lots of us are thinking anxious thoughts as we fall asleep these days. And it's nice for our bedtime as well as our dreams. But it's pretty effective for getting rid of anxiety dreams. So now I'm going to do a Q&A that the questions will be here. When people are in a sleep lab, how do you tell the difference between them not sleeping well due to sleep disorder and not sleeping well due to the electrodes on their head and people watching? It seems like anyone trying to sleep with electrodes would have trouble. Yes. And sleep researchers know that. And the researchers who are trying to do some intervention or wake people up and see what they're dreaming or do something for research purposes, what they do is to have at least one night to acclimate to the lab where you sleep with the electrodes on, but they're not actually recording anything or using it in any way. And ideally they do about 3 nights like that. So you get used to sleeping in the lab and you get used to sleeping with an electrode cap on, and generally people do like not sleep as much the first night and then gradually start sleeping much more normally. So that's how researchers do it. In clinical eval labs, they usually, insurance will not pay for an unused night in the lab, so that generally they do 1-night evaluations, but they're not looking for some of the same things the researchers are. They're often looking for whether you're having apnea episodes where you stop breathing or restless leg movements. And so for a lot of what they're evaluating in the sleep lab, they just need for the person to go to sleep at all to see what a, even a half-hour period of their sleep is like. And it's not generally being done just to evaluate whether someone has insomnia. I mean, someone can time their sleep at home. It's done to either see if there's something abnormal in the brain waves or the body movements. And so typically for those clinical things, they need you to fall asleep, which once in a while somebody doesn't, but they don't need you to be asleep for a real long time. Here's a question I want to answer. What effect has the last few weeks of mass protest had on the dreams? Well, my survey specifically asked for dreams about the COVID-19 pandemic. So by definition, they think it's a dream about the pandemic. So the only ones I've been getting into the survey are ones where the protests are making people afraid about catching it. I've seen several dreams where the person is going out in public and they encounter protesters. They seem to be, it looks like the dreamer is not someone who participates in the protests, but they see the protesters and they're afraid because either the protesters are going to make it impossible to stay 6 feet apart as they pass in the street, or some of the protesters don't have masks on. So they stir up this fear that they're about to catch the in a couple, they're mostly worried about the protesters catching it, but in most, they're going to have to pass by them and they're worried about catching it themselves. But definitely, I'm on lots of dream boards and places where people post and discuss dreams. And so I've been seeing lots more interesting dreams that are clearly more about the protests themselves from people. Both positive ones where there's some utopian future from that, where the protests have had this dramatic effect on society and things are more egalitarian now, but also fearful ones. A number of people who remarked that the protests they've actually been to have been peaceful ones, but they would have an anxiety dream where in one case, it was the protesters who were getting violent, but in most cases, it's the police in the dreams start doing usually kind of dream-like, bizarre kinds of aggression, but it's scary because the police are doing something to the protesters. And then I've seen dreams that are more about the movement itself, not the protests, but just the fact that Black Lives Matter. One white woman dreamed that some men who weren't in police uniforms, but they seemed like authorities, knocked her elderly mother down. And in reality, her mother died about 6 months ago, but in the dream, the mother is toward the end of her life, but out and about. And so they knock her mother down. And her interpretation when she woke up was that her dream was using her mother, who was both real active in feminist movement and in anti-Jewish discrimination causes, that they were pushing her mother down to kind of emphasize for the dreamer that these protests were a very similar thing to what her mother did, and the police would have treated her mother the same way as they're treating the demonstrators, and just to make her kind of identify with that more. And then some are really dream-like and different. There was one dream where someone was with a group of people who were putting together a creature that he described as like an octopus, only with more appendages. And they were grafting on human arms and legs of all skin colors to this creature. And he thought maybe there were some animal legs or aliens, but there were definitely all these different kinds of people. And although it sounded like this kind of horrible Frankenstein image visually, he was very clear that it was this like wondrous transcendent thing that was happening. And as soon as this creature was complete, it was going to bring the entire world together, because it would unify all kinds of people, because it was made of all kinds of people, and there would be no more racial strife once this creature was finished. So I've seen fascinating dreams. People are certainly dreaming a lot about that movement. And there's some anxiety dreams, but they're certainly not as uniformly anxious. And again, I get a very narrow sample into my survey. How do I remember my dreams? I usually do not, although often wake up with a sore jaw, as have had stressful dreams. The jaw is not necessarily related to the dreaming. There are a lot of people who clench and grind their teeth, and that's not actually happening mostly during dreaming sleep. It just seems to be an involuntary, some people have other kinds of body movements during sleep, but jaw clenching or even teeth grinding is a moderately common sleep disorder, and it's not usually happening during dreams. But the other question, first of all, to get enough sleep, that graph I showed, if you're sleeping less than 8 hours, you're really losing a lot of your dream time. So try to get 8 hours of sleep. Try not to set an alarm, because naturally we're likelier to wake up from a REM period. And if you set an alarm, you've only got about a 20% chance of that being the stage you wake up from. So get plenty of sleep, and you can do the same kind of thing I was suggesting for specific content of just as you're falling asleep, tell yourself, I want to remember my dreams tonight. I want to remember my dreams. Maybe replay one dream that you do remember, even from way back when, as you're falling asleep. And then it's equally important what you do in the morning, that you don't hop up out of bed, turn your attention to something else, because during REM, our short-term memory is turned on, but our long-term memory is not. So if you stay asleep after a REM period, the dream is not transferred into long-term memory. It's lost forever. You have to wake up at least momentarily a little bit. But you also need to stay focused on the dream when you first wake up, or if you turn your attention to anything else, it will be lost and not stored in long-term memory. So just lie there. If you do recall a bit of a dream, kind of rehearse it in your mind or dictate it to your phone or write it down. But if you don't recall a dream at first, just see what you woke up with. If you feel a little sad or you woke up thinking about your brother, just stay with that, because sometimes a dream comes rushing back then. Oh yeah, I was sad because I dreamed that this bad thing happened to my brother. That it'll come back then much more likely. Later in the day, occasionally seeing something that's very similar to a dream image will trigger recall. But for the most part, if you don't give yourself some time to try to recall them when you first wake up. Glad you said there were no recipes for dreams. Did you go through interpreting the latent content of your participants? In the survey, not. There was a place where people could give me their contact information, and I contacted a few where I was curious to hear more about the situation in which the dreams were dreamed, and I ended up doing a little interpretive work with those people. So there are a few dreamers where I know a fair bit about the dreamer and have been in contact with the dreamer. But for the most part, they just sent a dream into the survey. Oh, something I probably should have said at the start is I collected 9,000 dreams from 3,700 people. And I have read all but like about the last 400 dreams that have come in. At the time I got the book written, I'd read more than 8,000. So it takes a lot of time just to read them. And it's kind of interesting to hear dreams without, normally I want to have the dreamer there and sort of, do the dream interview method kind of thing, or at least hear background about why they might have dreamed that. But I found that in just reading dreams and not having the dreamer there to ask any further questions of, that it kind of made me stay with the dream and stay in the dream world. And it kind of it became a little more like I was having the experience, and I stopped thinking about it analytically as much as I was reading the dream and just experiencing it. I certainly thought about them analytically as I was writing the book. How do you discern between people's actual dreams and creative writer submissions, i.e. made up content in your surveys? I don't. I have occasionally encountered dreams that just don't sound real dreamlike. They sound more like a short story. And I do imagine that a few of those are either totally made up, it didn't happen as a dream at all, or that the dreamer had a dream that had most of that content, but they've nevertheless kind of put it together to make something that's a little bit more of a waking story and is losing a few of the kind of odder dream details as they sort of try to get it written well. But I just think relatively few people are going to spend their time screwing around with a researcher. So for the formal analyses, I'm going to run lots of statistics on these. And I think that in 9,000 Dreams, that the fake dreams just kind of disappear out of influencing the content. But also, I've had some dreams that were very neat and followed a really clear storyline and were not as confused as my other dreams. And I've heard some dreams that just sound like perfect stories from people who I really, really trust and believe. And there are a lot of novelists out there who say they dreamed the basic plot for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Frankenstein were both dreamed. Amy Hand dreamed one of her novels. The Twilight series was first imagined in a dream. So I think there's some variation, and some of these seem real, but I don't have them hooked up to a lie detector, so I'm sure a few fake dreams get by me. What's the normal amount of REM sleep? It's about 20% of our sleep. So when we're sleeping 8 hours, so it's somewhat less than 2 hours of sleep, but of which like at least 30 minutes is that last period that you want to get. Can you talk about the sensation of deja vu in dreams? Oh dear, this is one where I really wish I could ask the questioner, because there are two things you could be asking. Sometimes in a dream, someone has deja vu. Within the dream, something looks familiar, and sometimes it's because it's a dream set. Some people go back to the same dream settings. I mean, obviously we all do with some places that are real, our childhood homes or something, but some people have places that don't exist in the waking world that they see in their dreams, but sometimes they're not, because memory is a little faulty in dreams. We do have that kind of not able to place when we've been here before because it's in another dream and we're not accessing our other dream memories. But the other thing you may be asking about is that when we have a deja vu experience by day, where all of a sudden we feel like, oh my God, I've lived through this before. There are a lot of things that can cause that. One is little seizures in the part of our brain that is associated with saying, this is familiar, this is familiar. It's just seizure activity in the area that's supposed to recognize familiar things, but nothing's triggering it except this abnormal activity. Sometimes there's a real waking life memory that's a kind of a tip of the tongue thing that we can't quite recall, but it's enough to trigger familiarity. But definitely sometimes it's because we've dreamed this. Some people have a deja vu. I've lived through this before. I've seen this before. I've said this to this person. When did that happen? And you can't place it at first, and then it's, oh, I dreamed that. So dreams interact with deja vu in a lot of ways because dream memory is so fragile that both within the dream that can induce deja vu within the dream, but also a dream that's not clearly remembered can be inducing a waking deja vu. If someone has had brain damage in the short-term memory area, is it harder for them to retain dreams? Yes, I mean, no more so than it's hard for them to retain waking experiences, but yeah, pretty much the same areas are processing dream recall, and yet they're more fragile and shakier for the dreams. So people who are coming down with Alzheimer's often just lose any dream recall, while they still basically can recall a fair number of incidents that have happened. If we use the technique you recommend of thinking what we'd want to dream, is there any negative health advantage of always trying to block out bad dreams? Should we not resist the bad dreams part of the time in order to help us work through our subconscious worries? I mean, I definitely think that you learn something about yourself by doing the more interpretive work, and I would discourage most people from, just because they have a bad dream, trying to get rid of them. But no, I think most of the people that really badly want to try that are having very repetitive nightmares or anxiety dreams that they really describe as contributing to their waking anxiety. And they either kind of already understand what they're about, or they are the kind of person that doesn't fully want to understand what it's about. And repression is not always bad. It sometimes helps people, live with some trauma. But you can also use something similar to the technique I was talking about of incubating particular dream content at bedtime to do something that's not as suppressive. You can tell yourself, if you have another anxiety dream about catching the virus, that this time you'd like it to tell you something productive about how you can keep safer, or you'd like the dream to tell you why you're still worried about this when you're sheltered at home with not much risk. You can ask questions of your dreams or kind of direct them in ways that are not as completely suppressive. What do I think about the theory that remembered dreams are failed dreams and that we aren't supposed to remember them? Yeah, one of the Francis Crick had what he did not refer to, but other theorists referred to as the garbage disposal theory of dreams, that they were getting rid of things we should not remember, and that trying to remember our dreams might be bad for us and because he discovered DNA, he knew nothing about dreams, but he got to publish this in a major publication because he was Francis Crick. So I think that's just complete poppycock. There's no evidence that efforts to recall dreams are bad for you. There's definitely some research out there that shows that doing some of the simple kinds of dream work is helpful. If you're depressed and you're doing dream work about dreams about your depression, that is helpful to your mental health. So it just doesn't fit the data at all. But people cut Crick a lot of slack because of his other work. I have rehearsals in my dreams during times of stress, such as now, where I play through a situation I anticipate. Is this common? It's at least reasonably common. I mean, almost everyone dreams about upcoming situations that they're thinking about, but some people find that they really practice things in their dreams in a way that that makes them go better, that they dream of several ways they have a conversation, and they kind of dream one that they wouldn't have thought of awake that's the way to approach this person. Or I know some athletes who dream like a new way of holding their tennis racket where they serve better. Arnold Palmer did the same thing with the golf club swing, of when he was getting older and didn't have as much strength, his game was getting worse, and he dreamed that he was holding the club in this different way that sort of maximized fine motor skill and didn't call on brute muscle strength as much. So yeah, people have rehearsal dreams that feel a little nonsensical, but obviously on the topic. But people also have ones that really seem to be very useful practice. What do you think about lucid dreaming? I think it's fascinating. I have some lucid dreams. They're really wonderful. I do some of the commonly described techniques to try to have more of them. The only caveat I would say is that some people, when they hear about lucid dreaming, they think lucid dreaming would be a really good way to achieve all kinds of other things in dreams, like to get rid of nightmares. I'll teach myself to become lucid, and then I'll tell myself I don't want this to be a nightmare. Or I want to problem solve in my dreams, so I'll learn to become lucid, and then I'll remember that I want to be thinking about this problem. And it's just a lot harder to have a lucid dream than it is to do the dream incubation I was just talking about, because basically it's prefrontal area that's usually really damped down during REM sleep needs to reactivate before you're going to notice things are bizarre and, oh my God, this is a dream rather than reality. Whereas it's some more core, central, primitive memory areas that if you just, I want to dream about this friend, or I want to dream about my childhood home. If you're just doing simple images, simple requests, it's definitely more complicated to do the mediating part of, I want to be lucid. And it's not necessary to change nightmares or ask yourself a certain question or dream about particular content. But lucid dreams are just a really interesting state of consciousness for their own sake. So I certainly encourage people to explore them. If my partner vocalizes in their dreams, should I answer? Most sleep talkers won't dialogue with you, but some sleep talkers will dialogue with you. That you might ask your partner how they feel about that, and as long as they say it's okay, that could be interesting. Some people are just very concretely lost in some strange world, and even if they're reacting to the sound of your voice, they're not going to say anything very related to what you've said, but others are. First of all, sleep talking occurs across all stages of sleep, and so only about 20% of it is happening during REM sleep, but the more interesting happens out of dreaming REM sleep. In deep, deep sleep, people kind of just say one word. They're often mumbly and you can't understand them. In sort of the mid stages of sleep, people say one sentence, often repetitive. A cashier will say, "Thank you very much. Please come again. Thank you very much." So the other sleep stage vocalizations are not that interesting, and they're not accompanied by a dream. But people in REM sleep can say mini sentences, they'll tell jokes, they'll laugh, they sing occasionally, and they sometimes respond in a meaningful way, and yet it's a sort of a different them than would be talking. So back to, what I said first, I think. I think it would be a kind of invasion of privacy if you did that without getting their permission. But if they thought that was an interesting experiment, then by all means, that would be an interesting thing to do. when repetitive dreams are born from trauma, is it possible to stop them? If they are like PTSD, would we have the same power to tell ourselves what we want to dream about something else before sleep? Actually, for real clear-cut post-traumatic nightmares where they're reenacting something that's really happened and where it's either the same nightmare all the time, or some people have had several worst events and so they have several repetitive nightmares. There's another technique that's better for that, and it's also better done with a therapist. I mean, these other things I've been telling you about, you can certainly do with a therapist, but I think lots of people get a lot out of them on their own. And for the trauma one, you can try it on your own, but I think it's better to work with someone. But for a recurring, real reenactment dream, the technique is usually to think of how you would like that dream to come out differently, not just a completely other dream, because the trauma dream that's occurring as a daytime flashback and everything probably will still intrude. But to think to address the dream itself and how would you like it to turn out differently. Lots of people say, I just want to wake up. And you can train yourself to do that sometimes, but it's the same way the dream is re-traumatizing you if a rape or a fire or whatever happens over and over every night. Rescripting a mastery dream will tend to carry over into waking life also and make you feel like the trauma is behind you and changed, and you wake up feeling relieved and better, the same way the nightmare makes you wake up feeling like it's just happened again. So sometimes when I just suggest to people that some people have mastery dreams spontaneously, the nightmare takes a different ending as they're kind of more naturally starting to get over their trauma, but that when you intend that at bedtime, then it makes it likelier. Some people, when I tell them that, they know how they would like the dream to turn out otherwise immediately. But if they don't, I tend to try to give them examples of a huge variety so that I'm not being leading. You know, I'll tell them they might want to fight off their attacker. They might want someone else to come rescue them. They might want a very dreamlike solution where they shrink the attacker down to the size of a bug, or they shoot them off into outer space, or maybe they just want to tell them why what they did was so wrong. And I just give examples of kind of all kinds of scenarios that I've heard from different people, and generally one clicks. Oh yeah, I want to do that. And then you have the person rehearse it in the therapy session, or if you're working on your own, just when you first think about this, kind of get the scenario really clear, fill it in with imagery. And then as you're falling asleep, you tell yourself, if I have the nightmare, I want, and you just kind of replay that ending. And there's research that suggests that when I and other clinicians were inventing this technique, basically it didn't work for everyone, but it worked for lots of people, and they would have the mastery dream and not have the nightmare again. But in some of the formal research on it, what they find that I think is interesting is that some people have the mastery dream and they never have the nightmare again, but other people who do this they never have the nightmare again, and they at least don't recall the mastery dream. So we don't know if they're having it and it's having its effect without being consciously recalled, or if perhaps the vivid visual imagery as you're falling asleep, which is a fairly suggestive state of consciousness, has some of the same benefits of actually having the dream. So you can try that on your own, but also therapy is especially good when it's bad trauma. While sleeping, my dog Chomper softly barks and his little feet will start moving as well. How detailed of dreams can dogs have? Well, most of the dogs who've told me dreams, they're pretty detailed. We don't know, obviously, but all mammals have rapid eye movement sleep, except for the whales and dolphins, who sleep with one side of their brain at a time. They probably have a really strange state of consciousness during sleep, as well as flying around in the air. But all other mammals have rapid eye movement sleep periods. They tend to be much shorter than 90-minute cycles for smaller animals, and elephants have longer, like I think it's 110-minute cycles for them, but they are cycling through REM and non-REM sleep. And some of my colleagues say we can't, that doesn't mean they're dreaming, that just means they have REM sleep. But I think it's pretty obvious that we don't know exactly what their consciousness is like awake either. But I certainly think that when they're in rapid eye movement sleep, the odds are overwhelming that they have the doggy equivalent of a dream. And one thing we know about humans is that we dream about the same things we're concerned with by day. So I would imagine that your dog dreams about you some, and that your dog dreams about his favorite toys and eating some. And although, just like with sleep talking, an animal may not for sure be in REM sleep and dreaming when it vocalizes, the feet moving does tend to go with REM sleep. Humans move mostly their eyes. That's what rapid eye movement sleep is named for. But babies always twitch their fingers. And some adults, you'll see little finger movements. And animals do a lot of paw and finger twitch stuff. So your dog's probably dreaming then, and he may be dreaming about the bigger dog that scares him, but he's probably dreaming about you sometimes.
And Dr. Barrett, this will probably be our last question for tonight.
Okay, apart from verbal narrative dream recounts of dreams, have you ever tried other method of collecting dreams, images, sounds, smells? I've never tried anything connected to smells. Way less than 1% of dreams report having any olfactory content. It seems to be rare in dreams. And sounds are described in about 3%. Musicians have a lot of sound, including music, in their dreams, but people who aren't terribly sound and music oriented awake often, even where there's conversation in their dreams, they'll say they're not really hearing the discrete words. It's almost like a telepathic conversation. So I have done some inquiry about sounds in dreams, like when I'm interviewing musicians about whether they ever hear music in their dreams, or whether their dreams are where any of their music comes from. But just as kind of a general survey like this, I've never tried doing it in any other mode. I think that drawings would be the one that would be at least equally interesting. And I have seen collections, like after 9/11, there was someone else that had children drawing their dreams about 9/11, and they didn't have a verbal account. They just had these pictures, which certainly spoke to you of what the kids had seen on the television that was tormenting them at night. And I encourage people who keep dream journals to consider drawing, either instead of the verbal account or out in the margins to supplement the verbal account. And because dreams are so visual, I think that's very helpful. The way, using SurveyMonkey, there was no way to ask people to do a little sketch if they'd like to also, but I certainly, when I'm working with clients, I encourage them to try drawing dreams and bringing dreams in, and I'm very interested in the visual representation of them, but I haven't really done research on that. Okay, that was our last question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Barrett, for such a fascinating and insightful presentation. I know everyone out there is giving you a huge virtual round of applause and thank you. And congrats on the release of the new book. I hope that everyone will go out and pick up a copy of Pandemic Dreams right after this conversation.
And thank you for having me. It was a really interesting audience and questions, even though I wish we weren't being filtered through Zoom and I could be looking at all you guys. I really enjoyed the dialogue at the end.
Yes, one day soon we hope that we can have you at the museum and continue this conversation
Yes.
in person and get through the rest of those questions. But in the meantime, we so appreciate you allowing us to bring this conversation into everyone's homes tonight. And we thank all of you for joining us as well out there. I need to thank our friends at the Lowell Institute one more time for making this conversation tonight with Dr. Barrett possible. And we ask you to go to mos.org/science matters to help support work like this. We hope to see everyone again. Thank you for spending your Thursday night with us, and have a great night. Thank you.
And thank you, James. I've watched some of these other events you've hosted, and you're just finding fascinating things to do in lockdown.
Oh, we're so lucky to have a wonderful community. So thank you again for being a part of that, and we will hopefully see everyone soon. Stay safe.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you.
night.